It's 6:47 a.m. in Palm Springs, April 1972. The desert sun is just beginning to paint the mountains gold. Frank Sinatra is standing in his kitchen, barefoot, wearing yesterday's dress shirt unbuttoned to the chest. His hand is shaking, not from age, not from booze, from something far worse. In his other hand, he holds a newspaper, the Los Angeles Times. The headline screams at him in bold black ink, but the words don't make sense. They can't make sense. Because the headline is describing something Frank Sinatra did last night, something he said, something he promised, except Frank Sinatra wasn't there. He was here, alone, asleep by 10 o'clock. He reads the headline again. His name, his quotes, his decisions, all of it printed as fact. Frank drops the newspaper onto the marble counter. He stares at it like it's a snake that just crawled out of his coffee cup. For 60 years, Frank Sinatra had controlled everything. The songs, the movies, the women, the narrative. He was the chairman of the board, the man who decided what was true simply by saying it. But on this morning, someone else had written his story, and what happens next will shake the most powerful entertainer in the world to his core. To understand why this moment shattered Frank Sinatra, you have to understand how desperately he needed control. Frank wasn't born with power. He clawed his way to it from the streets of Hoboken, New Jersey. His mother was a political operator. Frank learned early that in this world, you either controlled the room or the room controlled you. By 1972, Frank had spent 3 decades building an empire of influence that extended far beyond music. He had performed for presidents. He had dined with mobsters. He had destroyed careers with a single phone call. When Frank Sinatra walked into a room, the temperature changed. But Palm Springs was supposed to be his sanctuary. His compound was a fortress of solitude. Here, among the desert heat, Frank could escape the machinery of fame. The night before had been quiet, unremarkable. Frank had dinner alone. He was in bed by 10. He woke up at 6, made coffee, and walked to the end of the driveway in his robe to collect the newspaper. And then he unfolded the paper. The world he thought he controlled had moved without him. Someone had borrowed his name, his voice, his authority. Frank Sinatra in 1972 was not the young crooner who made Bobby Soxers faint in the 40s. He was 56 years old. His hair had thinned. The blue eyes that once sparkled with mischief now carried a permanent shadow of suspicion. He trusted almost no one. His marriages had failed. His children were grown and distant. The rat pack had scattered. Frank surrounded himself with handlers, bodyguards, and yes-men, but they weren't friends. They were employees. That morning, standing in his kitchen, Frank was alone. It was just him and the newspaper and the impossible words printed on the page. The headline claimed that Frank Sinatra had appeared at a fundraiser in Los Angeles the previous night, that he had endorsed a political candidate, that he had given a speech, that he had signed documents and made promises. But Frank hadn't left Palm Springs. He had witnesses. He had his security log. He had his own memory. Someone had used his name, or something else was happening, something Frank couldn't yet name. He picked up the phone and dialed his manager's number. No answer. He dialed his publicist. Same thing. Silence. Frank was the most connected man in show business, and suddenly, he couldn't reach anyone. The first call came at 7:15 a.m. Frank grabbed the phone before the first ring finished. "Frank, it's Mickey Rudin, his lawyer, his fixer." "Mickey, what the hell is going on? I'm reading about myself in the paper and I don't." "Frank, listen to me." Mickey's voice was tight. "Don't talk to anyone. I'm coming to you." "I wasn't there, Mickey. Whatever they're saying, I did." "I know. Just don't talk to anyone." The line went dead. In 30 years of working with Mickey Rudin, Frank had never heard that tone. It was fear. Lawyers didn't get scared. Mickey didn't get scared. But Mickey was scared now. At 8:30, Mickey's car pulled through the gate. Frank watched his lawyer walk up the path, briefcase in hand, face gray. "Sit down, Frank." "I don't want to sit down. I want to know what's happening." Mickey pulled out a stack of newspapers, the Los Angeles Times, the New York Post, the Chicago Tribune. They all had the same story. Frank Sinatra at the fundraiser. Frank Sinatra making promises. "Look at these pictures, Frank." Frank looked, and his blood went cold. The man in the photographs was wearing Frank's suit, his signature fedora. He had Frank's posture, Frank's gestures. But the eyes were wrong. The jawline was off. It was close, terrifyingly close, but it wasn't him. "Who is this?" Frank whispered. "We don't know, but this person made commitments in your name. Financial commitments, political commitments. He signed documents. He made promises to people who don't take kindly to broken promises." "What kind of people?" Mickey didn't answer. He didn't have to. By noon, Frank Sinatra was no longer standing in his kitchen. He was sitting in his living room, surrounded by lawyers and publicists and men whose names he didn't know. The room was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. But Frank wasn't paying attention to any of them. He was staring at the telephone on the side table, because Mickey had told him that a call was coming. A call from someone who wanted to explain. At 12:17, the phone rang. Frank picked it up. The room went silent. "Francis." The voice was smooth, familiar, almost friendly. "I hear you've had an interesting morning." "Who is this?" "An old acquaintance, someone who's been watching your career with great interest. I asked you a question, and I'm going to give you an answer. But first, I want you to understand something. Last night, a man who looked very much like you made some very important commitments on your behalf. Commitments that certain people are expecting you to honor." Frank's grip on the phone tightened. "I didn't make any commitments. That wasn't me." "I know it wasn't you, Francis. That's the point." "What the hell does that mean?" "It means that for 30 years, you've been the one deciding what's true. You've been the one making the calls, pulling the strings, telling the world what Frank Sinatra thinks and does and believes. But here's what you never understood, Francis. Control is borrowed. It's never owned. And last night, someone borrowed yours." Frank stood up. The lawyers watched him, frozen. "Tell me who you are, right now." "I'm the man who's going to give you a choice. You can honor the commitments that were made in your name. Show up where you're supposed to show up. Say what you're supposed to say. And this whole thing goes away. The newspapers print a retraction about the photographs being unclear. Everyone moves on. And if I don't? Then the world finds out that Frank Sinatra can be replaced, that there's a man out there who can walk like you, talk like you, sign your name, and nobody can tell the difference." "How long do you think your legend survives that, Francis? How long before people start wondering which Frank Sinatra they've been dealing with all these years?" The line hummed with silence. Frank could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. "You think you can threaten me?" Frank's voice was low. "Dangerous. Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are. You're Francis Albert Sinatra from Hoboken, New Jersey. You're the kid who used to run errands for Willie Moretti. You're the singer who built an empire on talent and intimidation and the carefully managed illusion that you're in charge. But here's what you forgot, Francis. Illusions only work when everyone agrees to believe them." Frank was silent for a long moment. The lawyers exchanged nervous glances. Then Frank did something that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. He laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had just seen something clearly for the first time. "You want me to play along?" Frank said. "You want me to show up and pretend that I made promises I never made, to people who think they own me? That would be the smart play, Francis. Then I'm going to disappoint you, because I've spent my whole life being smart. And you know what it got me? A house full of lawyers, and an empty bed, and a newspaper telling me who I am." He paused. The room held its breath. "You can tell whoever sent you that Frank Sinatra doesn't honor commitments he didn't make. You can tell them that if they want to destroy my reputation, they're welcome to try. I've survived Tommy Dorsey. I've survived the feds. I've survived 1,000 tabloid stories that should have ended me. You're making a mistake, Francis. Maybe, but it'll be my mistake, not yours, not theirs, mine." Frank hung up the phone. He stood in the center of his living room, surrounded by stunned faces. "Get these people out of my house," he said quietly. "All of them." The story broke 3 days later, not the way the caller had threatened, but in fragments. Rumors about a Sinatra impersonator, whispers about forged documents, a small item quickly buried. The commitments made in Frank's name were never honored. Whatever consequences were supposed to follow never materialized. Or they happened in shadows Frank never saw. But something had changed in Frank Sinatra. He canceled appearances. He retreated further into his compound. He stopped trusting his phones. He started double-checking every story about him, demanding original sources. Dean Martin called to check on him. "You sound different, Frank." "I'm fine." "You sound like a man who just realized the ground isn't as solid as he thought." Frank didn't answer, because Dean was right. For 56 years, Frank had walked through the world believing he controlled his own story. But on that morning in Palm Springs, he had learned something he could never unlearn. The story of Frank Sinatra didn't belong to him. It belonged to everyone who told it, every journalist, every stranger who claimed to know what Frank Sinatra thought and felt and did. He was just one voice among millions, and sometimes his voice wasn't even in the room. We spend our lives building narratives about ourselves. We curate our images. We tell the world who we are. But here's what Frank Sinatra learned that morning. Control is an illusion. The stories we tell exist alongside the stories others tell, and sometimes those other stories are louder. In the age of headlines and viral moments, this truth has only grown sharper. Any of us can wake up to find our names attached to words we never said. The question isn't whether we can prevent it. We can't. The question is what we do when it happens. Do we scramble to regain control that was never really ours? Or do we do what Frank did? Hang up the phone, clear the room, and decide that the only story that matters is the one we live, not the one that gets printed. Frank spent the rest of his life grappling with this truth. He never fully made peace with it, but in his quieter moments, perhaps he understood something the young Frank from Hoboken never could have grasped. The only control that matters is control over yourself, your choices, your integrity, your refusal to become what others decide you should be. Everything else is just ink on paper, and ink fades. This is a side of Frank Sinatra that rarely makes it into the biographies. Not the swagger, not the songs, but the man who stood alone in his kitchen, holding a newspaper, realizing that even the chairman of the board couldn't control the board. This was Frank Sinatra. Legacy Confidential. If this story made you think differently about fame, control, and the stories we tell about ourselves, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe, because we're just getting started. Next time, we're diving into another hidden chapter of Sinatra's life, a story about loyalty, betrayal, and the price of standing by your friends when the world tells you to walk away. Tell us in the comments, do you think we control our own stories, or are we all just characters in narratives written by others? Until then, remember, the only truth that matters is the one you live.